Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our CSR Marketplace Virtual 2023, in particular to this afternoon's session, demonstrating business value and social impact in the face of the ESG backlash. This session is hosted, and we'd like to thank our partners, True Impact. My name is Jean Metzger. I'm the Vice President of Membership Marketing and Communications at ACCP, and I'm so glad that you have joined us. For those of you who may be new to ACCP, I just want to share a little bit of basic information about us. We are the premier membership organization working to increase the effectiveness of corporate social impact professionals. We connect our members with the people, the knowledge, and the resources they need to enhance their impact in their companies and in their communities. This is just one session of several that we're hosting this week as part of our CSR Marketplace virtual program. We do have two more tomorrow, and so I do encourage everyone, if you have time, to register for those two as well. They each have been providing really great, valuable information to our audience. I also would like to point out some upcoming ACCP events. Our next webcast is on September 28th on the topic of social investment, driving long-term CSR impact. We also are very excited about our upcoming annual conference in just a few weeks in Denver, Colorado on October 16 through 18. And then our Impact Measurement Summit is our last summit of the year, and it will be happening the first week of December, December 5 through 6, and registration for that program will open on our website next week. Now for just a couple of webcast housekeeping tips. We have enabled Zoom transcription and closed captioning, so you can see the subtitles by clicking live transcript, and you can also see the full transcription by clicking the caret under transcript. We also are using Zoom chat. We encourage you to engage with the panelists through the chat and also with your fellow participants. And then we do encourage you to ask your questions throughout the program by using the Q&A feature. We will be tracking that Q&A throughout the program and answering your questions along the way. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our two speakers, Sara Ansell and Gabe Cohen, both from True Impact. So please take it away.
Hi, Jean. Thanks so much. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. First, thanks to Jean, Cassandra, and Barbara for all of their help getting us set up for this webinar. So we really appreciate it, and we appreciate all of you being here. I'll introduce myself and then pass it over to my colleague, Sara, to introduce herself. My name is Gabe Cohen. I'm the head of marketing and partnerships here at True Impact. I've been in the social impact space for well over a decade now. And I love thinking about ways that nonprofits and funders can communicate the difference that they're making through both stories and data, which is going to be a bit of a theme today. And as you can see, I am calling in from my garage, which is also my office in Washington, D.C. Sara, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I don't have as cool a garage as Gabe does, but I do have an office here in Madison, Wisconsin. So I'm calling in from the middle of the country. I have been at True Impact for a few years. I'm a senior social impact manager. And prior to that, I worked in an academic setting doing evaluation. And then prior to that, I was in the nonprofit sector for many years running nonprofit programs. So I offer all of that to say I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to both program implementation and evaluation. And luckily, I've seen mostly good. And so I'm really excited to share more about best practices when it comes to measuring impact and how to support your partners in gathering that information, as well as how to then share out that information effectively to your various audiences. So especially in the climate that we're in today. So I'm excited to talk further, and I'll let Gabe take it away.
Great. Thanks, Sara. I just want to introduce True Impact for a moment here. We won't spend too much time on this, but the important point is that we've been working with different CSR teams and companies for almost 20 years now. And our entire purpose is to help donors and then their nonprofits help to prove and then eventually improve their social impact. So as part of our work, we are talking with dozens of different companies every single year about what they're doing or what they want to be doing as it comes to CSR and then measuring that social impact. So why is that important for the conversation today? Well, I'm going to break the fourth wall a little bit and tell you all a story from our times at True Impact. And around last year, anytime we were talking with a company, at some point, the connectivity of CSR and ESG would come up. And they would want to know how we could help them substantiate the work that they're doing on the CSR side of things with a company's ESG reporting. And so we would help companies talk through that. And we decided about the beginning of this year that this would be a great topic to do a deep dive into. And so we started working on a white paper, which is now out and live. And I'll get to that and we'll share the link. But it took us a few months to get that white paper out. And the conversations at the beginning of that time couldn't not touch on ESG. But by the end of the time that we produced the white paper, which was getting towards spring, this started happening. And we were having conversations with companies and they would say, oh, we can't even talk about ESG anymore. And so it was that quick. In just a matter of months, we went from every conversation ending with ESG to not being allowed to use this dirty 3-letter acronym, if you will. And that was pretty abrupt, right? And I feel like a lot of us felt the brunt of that. And we're kind of swinging wildly from one place to another. But what we've learned through this subsequent 5 months since this backlash started is that you can kind of ignore it a little bit. Now, this isn't my advice for the communications teams that happen to be on this or any crisis communications people. It's something that needs to be figured out. But you, in your roles as corporate citizenship professionals, can focus on doing the most good for your company, the causes that you care most about, and the communities that you care most about. And so to do that, we think that you can think about this question, right? And when we originally framed it from the white paper's perspective, it was this. It was, how can CSR best support a company's ESG efforts? But the dirty little secret is it doesn't matter what you call it: sustainability, social impact, philanthropy, social value, leadership, corporate citizenship. The idea is that you want to make sure that your work on the CSR side of things is able to ladder up to what your company is trying to do and make that narrative and the data behind the narrative as clear as possible. So that's where we're going to spend our time today, is really helping you substantiate your work. But like I mentioned, when we wrote the white paper, it was all about this CSR direct connection to ESG. So you're going to see ESG throughout the presentation today, and we're going to talk about it. But just know that we're going to kind of circle back to this idea that it's not so important what you end up calling it, but what is important is that you're substantiating your work in a CSR as a CSR professional within the larger purpose and strategy of the company that you're supporting. When we look at the ESG framing, though, one thing is clear, is that obviously the overlap is the S, right? This isn't rocket science, social and social, right? So that's the easiest area of overlap between those two different divisions, if you will. And the other thing that's clear is that the S can actually be the hardest of E, S, and G to measure. And why is that? Let's dive into that for a minute. I think if you were to sum it up in one way, it would be that for so long, the efforts of CSR teams have been reported out as stories. And stories are really important. We're not saying at all that stories should go away, but stories don't work well in a corporate reporting framework, right? They need hard data and numbers, and people are used to projections and seeing the impact of things, whether it's finances or the number of products sold or subscriptions or whatever it may be. Companies are much more used to reporting out on data. And so a piece of advice that we have, and what we've done through this presentation, you'll see these little orange boxes. We've tried to be really clear about takeaways throughout the presentation today. And so the first one that we want to focus on is, while it can traditionally be hard to measure the S, the more that you're able to substantiate the work that you're doing with quantitative data, the better off you're going to be at justifying these commitments that you have, that you know and we know are very important to those causes, communities, and nonprofits. But the more that you're able to put numbers behind that, the better off that you're going to be. So this is what we're going to spend our time talking about, probably the next 30 minutes or so. As Jean mentioned, please drop questions in there. I even like the example question that was used. What is your favorite ice cream? I'm happy to talk about that for a few minutes. I'm sure Sara is as well. But you can get even meatier than that as well. We're happy to answer questions throughout. And we'd like to make this really your time. So any questions that you have, feel free to drop those in the pane there at the bottom. So
Blue Moon ice cream. Anybody in the Midwest knows what I'm talking about. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, chocolate chip cookie dough. It doesn't matter the brand. Yeah, okay, all right. So back to our regularly scheduled program. The 4 things that we're going to touch on today: what to measure, how to measure it, leveraging those results, right? You've done the hard work of measuring your impact, make sure to make use of it. And then we're going to circle back to dealing with the backlash, as we mentioned earlier. So let's dive into the what to measure. And the first thing that we recommend that you do, and I would guess that basically every company that's on here has already done this, but you want to start with a materiality assessment. And the more that's possible, I would also work on a double materiality assessment. And that's where you start to take a look at not just those direct ramifications of your efforts, the business ramifications, but also the societal ramifications as well. So look at those 2 things, right? Think about the focuses of your company from a business perspective on its internal employees and shareholders, but then also from a societal perspective and its customers and communities and government agencies that you might be supporting, and then literally make that Venn diagram overlap and figure out what's there. The other way that you can articulate this is try to figure out how your company is uniquely qualified to support the causes and communities that you care most about and that are most directly related to your company's function. So if you can answer that question, then you're going in a really good direction. Most of the time, you can use a who, what, where framework to get at the heart of that, to translate that materiality assessment and the double materiality assessment into what are the nonprofits that you really want to support as a CSR function. Who are the partners that you should be working with? And there's 3 different ways that you can slice that. The first is, what are the demographic groups that you want to support? The second is, what cause areas do you want to focus on, right? If you're a technology company thinking about something like STEM, pretty easy and straightforward. And then the last is, what geographies do you want to focus on? And maybe you're thinking about that from a market perspective or the countries where you're mostly focused, or maybe you've got big operations in different areas around the country. And maybe it's kind of all of these things. A lot of the companies that we work with will have really local presences where they have factories or offices, and then they'll have more national presences or global presences if that's where they're focused. So think about the who, what, and where to make those connections. The next piece of advice that we want to offer is to not recreate the wheel. And our advice here is to look at who's doing this well, and then think about how you can use similar strategies and frameworks to make a difference in your work. So a few ways that you can do that. Start by looking at the frameworks that are out there. None of them are perfect. There's way too many of them, but try to find one that works the best for you and take what works, and then you can deviate if you need to as well. The next thing that you can do is go and look at how some of your competitors or peers are doing this. Maybe you want to go into an incognito window before you do that so that they don't know that you're doing it, but that's okay. It's always good to see what else is out there. And then the last thing is just keep up with the trends. It's changing really quickly, particularly if you're located somewhere like the EU, there's new regulations that are getting rolled out, or if you have even a sizable presence in the EU. So you do need to kind of keep abreast of the things that are going on around you. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sara. Sara, you want to take it over?
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. So we wanted to offer this as kind of a grounding for what we often see. So at True Impact, we're working with, dozens of companies every year on trying to achieve their CSR objectives. And this is often what we see at the beginning of our work together, that they have statements that they put out about their initiatives and their efforts. And it looks something like, we care most about these particular issues, and we've committed $30 million to those initiatives. That's a powerful statement, but it's missing something critical. It's missing that impact piece. And we often remind CSR programs that just like if another functional area of your company said, look, we put $30 million towards this advertising initiative and this incredible campaign, but then they didn't follow it up with what came from that, there'd be some real questions. And so similarly, we want to make sure that you are equipped with the follow-up information. So what came from that investment? And that's really what we're going to focus on, in this conversation today, is how do we translate those excellent intentions into impact, so that you can then share it out in the ways that you'd like to through ESG reports or sustainability reports, et cetera. So the first thing we want to level set with is some grounding around these definitions. So inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but it's helpful to just make sure we walk through it. So inputs are the things that support the programs in running, right? In serving the individuals and generating those social impacts. So these inputs might be things like cash or staff or equipment or office space, or even some of the expertise that your company is providing. So a lot of that pro bono support or volunteerism, all of these are examples of inputs. These are key ingredients to making sure that that effort or initiative can operate. Outputs are the short-term, the immediate goods or services that are delivered. So this is the number of people engaged, or the number of meals delivered, or the number of trainings that have been provided. These are often the easiest to count, and so this is sometimes used as a proxy for outcome. But we really want to encourage all CSR programs to focus on outcomes. So when we talk about outcomes, when we think about outcomes, a key central concept is how our lives improved. So how many people experience the benefit of this program, not just by being engaged, but the ultimate ways in which their lives are improved, or another way to think about it is the contributions to society. So we recommend staying laser focused on that end outcome, knowing that the inputs and outputs are important pieces to track, but outcomes is really what matters most. Let's talk a little bit about why. I mean, maybe it's obvious, but I want to honor that, some programs, some CSR programs say, look, we want to make sure that it's easy for our partners to report. And so we're comfortable with outcomes. And, we believe in the outcomes. We believe in what those outputs might lead to. But let's talk a little bit about Tom's shoes. So Tom's shoes, I'm sure you all are familiar. I have, I think, 2 or 3 pair upstairs right now. Great shoes. And one of their, mission statements was that for every pair of shoes that someone bought, they would give a pair of shoes to someone in need. And it sounded beautiful. And it wasn't until a few years after they've rolled out this initiative that they realized, maybe we should look a little bit more deeply into what those outcomes of this effort is. We suspect that it's giving people a critical need, addressing a critical need and helping them live safer and healthier lives, but let's confirm that. So they hired some researchers, and those researchers did some solid research on what the outcomes of this free distribution of shoes are. And what they found was, in fact, it wasn't really having the intended impact. In fact, it was increasing some stigma related to being the recipient of donated goods. It was having a little bit of a negative impact. And as a result of that, Tom's Shoes really changed course, and they started to give funds towards much more community-based needs. And I tell you that story because measuring outcomes is good for more than one thing. It's not just going to illuminate the good that you're having in society and the way that lives are improved, but it's also going to shine a light on what might need improving in your programs. So tracking outcomes is critical to making sure that you're having the impact that you want to have, and so that you can then speak about that impact to your stakeholders. So I mentioned that I have this kind of experience in academia, have experience in the nonprofit sector, and I feel like I have really lived what I'm about to show you guys, which is this continuum. So on one side of the continuum, there's impact, which is really outputs often. This is really where folks might talk about the inputs or the outputs, but not really get to that end outcome. And this is common in organizations where they are working fast, working hard, and may not feel as though they have the expertise to track those end outcomes. Then there's impact with a million footnotes. And this is that academic setting I came from. This is rigorous and important and has a place, but it is not something that day to day those of us outside of academia can digest or implement. And so what we believe strongly in is the sweet spot between the two, where we want to make sure that your organizations that you support are able to speak to those end outcomes, but do so in a way that doesn't require a couple of different PhDs on staff. So this sweet spot is key to illuminating for you at the CSR level, what's the impact that our philanthropy is having. It's also key for you to share those results with others, but it's also key for the nonprofits who are working hard and working fast and don't have those PhDs on staff. So how do we stay focused on this sweet spot? And that's what we want to break down for you all, is how do you equip your partners and how do you support them in measuring what matters most? So we believe there are 4 key things to measure. First is impact, not inputs, not outputs, but impact. Then we want to make sure that those those outcomes are aligned to your goals. So after you've done that materiality assessment that Gabe mentioned, how are those impacts aligned? Then you can also dig into how much good are we having and how well are we attaining that good? How well are we generating that good? How efficient are our programs that we support in generating the good? And then last but not least, how do we know that we can trust that data? So these are the 4 key elements to making sure that you are collecting the right information and that you have everything you need to share it out with your stakeholders in the context of either an ESG report or, to Gabe's point, maybe it's not the time to call it ESG, maybe it's a sustainability report or your leadership report, etc. So let's dive into each of these a little bit more. How do we measure impact? This is such a massive bucket and I could talk forever about it, but I'm going to break it down in the simplest terms. When we work with hundreds of nonprofits a year. When we work with nonprofits and helping them identify what their end outcome is, we walk them through this 4-stage theory of change framework. And I want to share it with you all because I think it's language that you all can use when you're working with your partners or even thinking about your own internal theory of change. There are 4 key stages. Reach is the number of people who are engaged. So let's take an example. This is a youth education program, and they're learning about nutrition. This program engages 100 youth in kitchen-based cooking classes. The next stage is learn. Of those 100 youth, let's say 90 of them learn successfully about eating healthy and how to cook fruits and vegetables. And we can talk a little bit more about how they might know that. But learn is the next key stage. Then, as a result of the learning, perhaps a subset of those 90 go on to actually consume more fruits and vegetables when they go home every day. And then as a result of all of that, their lives are improved because their health is improved. So if you break down across your programs, these 4 stages of your theory of change, the benefit of doing this is it disentangles the steps along the way to the end outcome. I'm going to give you a little hack here. There's an easier way to get at this, even though I think this is pretty streamlined, but the hack is that you can also ask a very simple question of your partners, which is, and then what? So you engage 100 youth, that's incredible. And then what? Well, then those youth, they go on and they learn so much. It's incredible to see, their brains are just on fire with this. That's amazing. And then what? Well, then they take that information and they do something with it. They change their behavior. That's incredible. And then what? Well, and then, their health is improved. At the end of the day, ultimately, we're in the business of improving health. So the constant nudging towards the end outcome is going to identify that North Star, that end outcome for your partners, for yourselves, for your communications team, et cetera. It's all about nudging towards those end outcomes. So the next key element to measuring well, not just focusing on impact, but then once you have that clarity of what the impact is, that health improvement, for example, asking yourselves these questions or asking your partner these questions. Does it align with the demographics that we are so focused on? You're helping 68 kids improve their health. That is incredible. Is it among the populations that matter most to our company? cause area. If your work is dedicated to improving food security and improving health, then wonderful. This program is fully aligned. Perhaps it's not. Perhaps you're doing economic development work. And so this is an opportunity for you to identify whether or not that impact is aligned to your causes. And then last but not least, perhaps the work that you're supporting is incredible work, but it's not happening in the areas, the geographic areas that matter most. So for my clients, the companies that we work with, very few are looking across all three. They're thinking about one or two of these, and then they're aligning impacts based on that, or reviewing for alignment based on that. A key takeaway here is that this gives you the framework that you need if you ever have to push back on some historical investments that perhaps your company has been giving for many years. Your board chair's alma mater, for example, not uncommon at all for that to constantly be a line item in your philanthropy budget. This is an opportunity for you to say, gosh, I understand that's an important investment, an important area of our giving. Let's look at how it aligns with our demographics. Let's look at how it aligns with our causes. Let's look at how it aligns with our geographic giving areas. So consider this framework as an opportunity to review historical investments and also to inform future investments. The third element that we wanted to identify as a key piece to measuring well is to think about the efficiency or efficacy of your giving. So if you look at this slide and there's a part of you that cringes because you feel like, gosh, can we really take the complexity and the diversity of the nonprofit programs that we support and break it down in a way that we're looking at cost per outcome or social return on investment? Does that diminish the power and complexity of their work? And I guess what I want to say to you is, I hear you. And I agree that in absence of any context and real thoughtfulness, these kinds of analyses can sometimes oversimplify the diversity of your nonprofit programs and therefore the diversity of their results. However, I have seen in practice, when you bring a lens such as looking at the social return on the investment or the cost per outcome, when you bring that lens as well as some sensitivity to the ways to contextualize that information, such as by these areas. If you're looking at within the organizations that we support that serve our priority populations, or that focus on a particular impact that matters most, or that serve a particular geographic community, within those areas, how effective are these different programs? That's when this process, this reviewing the SROI or cost per outcome, really can serve as a flashlight rather than a hammer. This really is an opportunity for you to see with clarity where there is an opportunity to improve your efficacy of those investments. Okay, so last but not least, the fourth element of measuring well here is to think about the quality of the information that you are gathering from your nonprofit partners. So one of the principles that I really appreciate about our work at TrimPact is that we come from something called a best available data approach, which is to say, look, not every nonprofit has those PhDs on staff. We're not looking for impacts that have 18 footnotes. What we're looking for is information that you can readily collect yourselves or information that already exists out there in the field. Quality evidence, research that has been done by other organizations that you can then use as an estimate. You can use as the basis for an extrapolation of what your impact might be. Those two pieces, information you collect yourselves or extrapolations or estimates based on existing evidence, that is what we consider high quality data. And we would encourage you all to consider that high quality data. The only piece that we don't consider high quality is what we would call speculations or guess, where the organization says, look, we really don't know if their health is improved. We know we gave workshops. We know we helped 100 kids come to those workshops. We don't know what happens when they go home. And if that is the case, that's an opportunity for you as a funder to either say, gosh, it sounds like you could benefit from some capacity building around how might you measure that impact, or how might you scour the research for evidence to use as a basis of an estimate, or Until you have stronger measurement in place, we may not be able to continue our philanthropic giving. The key here is not just the different categories of data quality, but it's also the fact that we are encouraging you all to ask for this, to say, tell us your impact, tell us what you do, tell us how you improve lives, and tell us how you know that. So if you remember my hack from earlier where I said, ask the and then what question, there are a couple questions you could ask after that. You could say, and then what, and then what, and then what? And when they finally say, and we help kids graduate high school, that's incredible. How do you know? That's the key question at the end. How do you know? And if they tell you that they know because they have estimates or they know because they directly measure that information, then you can feel rock solid that the information that you're collecting is based on high quality information. I'm seeing some Q&As. Gabe, should I take a pause and answer any questions that have come in?
We can if we want to. There was one that came in that just came in that I thought was a good question, which is what's a unique way that we've seen a company use social impact measurement in their ESG reporting? And I was thinking about this, and there's a client of ours that has a national presence. They're a retail store, so they have companies, I think, in almost every single state. And one of the awesome things that they did as a part of their ESG reporting and their broader social impact reporting this year was they were able to create a report that included impact reports for every single state that they worked in. And we thought that that was such a great way of connecting the thing that matters most to the individual, but still being kind of universally clear on the impact that they're having. And so what I mean by that is, I live in Washington, D.C. And so when I look at a ESG report or a social impact report and I see that there's this big national presence, that's great. But then if I can see a report that narrows in just on Washington, D.C., that's even better. It makes the connection really clear to me of what they're able to do. So I thought that was a really great connection. Sara, any examples that you can think of?
Yeah, and one of my clients does a really nice job of providing, and maybe this isn't, super exciting, but they provide a really nice high-level summary of the overall social impacts that they have generated over the course of many years. And then they highlight a particular year's impacts. And then beyond that, they highlight particular initiatives. And I find that it's a really nice way of speaking to a variety of audiences. Some audiences really appreciate understanding how over the years they're making progress towards the goals that they set out. And then others really appreciate, the more specific information about not just particular organizations, but particular initiatives within their company. So I know that they're really trying to strike a balance between meeting the needs of a variety of stakeholders, both internal and external board members, as well as external auditors, et cetera. So I've always appreciated that kind of multifaceted approach.
Great. We have another question here that's how's the system aligned with GRI framework, or is it one that can customize a framework according to your business needs? And I think that if I'm understanding this right, this might be a question about our system, True Impact, but I'll take a first shot at that, Sara. Please weigh in. I think the important thing when you're starting to think about these specific frameworks is that frameworks can shift. And the framework that your company may be choosing to use one year may not be the one that they're choosing to use the next year. We would hope that isn't the case, but what you need to have is a system that's flexible enough that it can aggregate data and it can filter data in any way that's needed to get to the end reporting structure that has been decided by the company or by the ESG team or whatever it may be. And so our True Impact can do that. This isn't a presentation on True Impact, but that's really what you need to do is you need to be able to have a data lake that's flexible enough that it can be filtered and sifted to answer whatever the specific questions of the reporting framework may be. And so that's something that we like to work with our clients on when we first work with somebody. And again, this is just a general best practice. When you start to think about what you want to report on, you need to think, and we're going to get to this in just a moment, but you need to think about where is that information going to be used, right? What is the end goal for collecting that piece of data? Where is it going to live? What reports is it going to go to? Is it going to go to your social media team? And have those use cases in mind first. And then that's going to tell you which pieces of data you need and which kind of frameworks that you need to have into place in order to answer those questions. So Sara, anything to add to that?
No, but it's actually a really nice segue into the chat that we received from Katie. Katie, I'm so glad you asked this question. What Katie is saying is, look, nonprofits often have multiple funders, so it doesn't seem right that we could claim the impact of a particular program that might receive funding from multiple sources. And yep, you're absolutely right. So what we encourage nonprofits to do, and I have to say, I really love this approach coming from a nonprofit background where I had to write 12 reports every year for my 12 funders. It drove me a little nuts. And so our recommendation is that nonprofits should not be in the business of speaking to specific funders about how their specific dollars were spent. That might sound antithetical to how reporting normally happens. So let me continue. What we usually what we recommend strongly is that nonprofits are in the business of talking about their program and the impacts that their program generates, period. Then from there, the funder that supported that work can claim a portion of those impacts. Now, there's a lot that I could say about that claim, but traditionally the claim is equal to the proportion of the budget, of the overall program budget that your funding supported. So if your funding represents 10% of that program's budget, then you can claim 10% of those impacts. Now, there are cases where you might be able to claim more if you're providing important capacity building, or if you're funding the underlying infrastructure of that program, or perhaps that program that you funded has been replicated in other locations. So we can talk more. Anybody who's interested in this kind of stuff, I will go down that rabbit hole with you. But in the meantime, I think the takeaway is that, Katie, I love this question because it is dead on that nonprofits often do have lots of funders. And for that reason, they should be able to do the thing that they do best, which is to run the program and tell you about the program. And then the funders who support them can do the work of pulling out the number of impacts that they can reasonably claim using that contribution claim calculation.
Yeah, and Sara, I'll just add to that. You said this earlier, but just to reiterate it, don't make the nonprofits do that math. It's really annoying. I've been on the nonprofit side of things too, and have them report on their overall program's impact. It's so much cleaner. They probably got that information. It's more useful to them anyway. And if you're having them do that math, then that's an added step that you could take on your own. And if you've got a system in place that will do it automatically. We've got some other questions going on, coming into the chat here. Let's take maybe one more, and then we'll save some to then. But keep the questions coming. And unfortunately, they're all about impact measurement and ESG, and not about ice cream. But that's okay too.
Blue moon.
Would funders? The next question is: would funders take the data reported by nonprofits on face value, or does True Impact help nonprofits verify their data? And this is a perfect segue into what you're going to talk about next, Sara.
Great. So let me forward along. So yes. So what we do is we review every report that comes through our system. And we do that because it gives us a chance to help your partners strengthen their reporting and to identify research that they might be able to base their impacts on if they're lacking that information. And it's another pair of eyes to ensure readability and to ensure accuracy. We feel like it's really important that the information that these partners are providing is something that you can really stand on as a funder. The thing that we don't require is that nonprofits only use evidence-based estimates or direct measurements. They can be transparent in saying that their data are based on speculation or guesses. The thing that we do require is that they tell you that. So as long as they are transparent about the source of their information, you then on the funder side can choose whether or not to include that information. A number of my clients, in fact, I think at this point, almost all of my clients exclude speculations from their ESG reporting. So it's as simple as literally us filtering out that information on your data dashboard if you're working with True Impact. But if you're collecting your own information, all of this that we're sharing is not just specific to True Impact. So I just want to be clear here that if you collect your own information in your own systems, we would encourage you to ask about the source of the information that your partners are using to report their impacts on, and then you can choose to filter out any guesses or speculation. So because ESG data is typically pretty heavily scrutinized, right? Because it's public information, then it's really important that you have that backing and understanding the source of that information. Having a third-party measurement firm always helps in ensuring your comfort and trust in the data.
And Sarah, I just jump in to add that I think the most important part of this is that the data that you're using when it gets to an ESG or social impact reporting, whatever it may be, you need to make sure that it's auditable, right? That you can stand behind it so that if there's ever a question, you can go back and you can say, look, this is what the nonprofit said that their impact was, and they based it off of this reasoning and they calculated it using this. And if you have that data there, then it makes it a lot easier to get to that takeaway that we have, which is going to your legal team, which almost every single ESG report, every company that we work with has to send that data to the legal team. And we'll get page-long spreadsheets of questions from auditors and from legal teams. And we're able to answer that because we have the receipts, if you will. And so we're able to go back and look at that. Oh my gosh, you're going to make fun of me for saying that. But that's the important thing, right? Is that you're able to track where those numbers are coming from, and that it is being reviewed by a human that it is involved in impact measurement, and so that you can stand behind it.
Great. I'm going to spin through a few more slides so we can make sure we have time at the end for Q&A as well. So let's say you have this robust impact measurement process in place because you've embedded in your process now those key elements. You're tracking impact, you're thinking about data quality, you're thinking about alignment, and you're also looking at how effective your investments are out in the community. How do you then leverage that? So we never want you to count for count's sake, right? And measure for measurement's sake. We really want you to leverage that information for both improvement in your programs and in your CSR giving, and also to be able to support, the various audiences that are interested in the impact of what you do. So the goal, or rather the benefit of having this information is to move from a reactive state to a proactive state. It really sets you up to be able to speak to a variety of audiences. So one important step in leveraging your results is to identify your audience in the appropriate context. So we're seeing a lot of our clients who are reporting to shareholders or board members or investors using the reporting and disclosures process for sharing that information. A lot of our clients are working with their marketing and comms teams in order to speak to employees and customers. And then also they're using some of this information to help identify new business opportunities and to speak to their own board and leadership as well as internal stakeholders. So really thinking about the different audiences that could use this information and then tailoring that information for them is key. Another quick kind of note from the weeds, so to speak. I'm in the weeds every day with my clients. My clients really understand the nuances of the data that they have collected. They don't often share all of those nuances with each of these audience members. They have a million asterisks in their head ready to go. But what they have gotten really good at doing is knowing which audience needs what kind of information. And they have different templates ready to go, different dashboards ready to go. And that's a really fun part of our work, is supporting our clients in generating that. So, this might sound straightforward, but when you actually get into the process of thinking about speaking to each of these audiences and then considering the kind of vehicle of communication, that gets really fun. And again, you are moving from that reactive state to proactive. You now have the time to think about, and the data to think about, how might you get ahead of a lot of the key questions that these different stakeholders might ask. So I mentioned, they have these templates and things ready to go. Here are some great examples. So for a lot of internal sharing, impact dashboards are incredible. Our dashboards that we create are live. And so our clients can have literally every hour in the hour refreshed information about the value of their philanthropic giving. But even if this is information that you're generating on your own internally, having that dashboard can be a really powerful way to speak to your stakeholders. Presentations, newsletters, social media, of course, ESG reporting, which is, the kind of root of what we're discussing here, and PR and news. These are all areas that we've seen our clients do really nice communication within. The other piece that I see from my clients who have really robust impact information is that they sleep a little better at night because they're not fearing this. When they get these kinds of questions, they're ready. So which nonprofits best deliver on our goals? My clients who know their data can say, well, let's talk a little bit about those goals. Are we talking about the geographic or the impact or issue goal? Are we talking about the priority populations? Because I can tell you about any of that. Or you say that you support DE&I, but how are you actually supporting local BIPOC communities? They can pull stories, qualitative and quantitative information ready to go about that particular priority population, et cetera. So these pop-up questions come from a variety of places. And I've seen my clients over the years move from fearing this to almost getting excited to respond to these, because there's so much information that they have that they can deliver a pretty quick response pretty effectively. So last but not least, I'm going to turn it back to Gabe. When we're thinking about how to measure well, we are encouraging you all to think about the impact, the alignment, the efficiency, and the data quality. And we are encouraging you to do that, not just because we know it equips you with the information that you need to speak to your ESG report, to speak to your board, et cetera, but also to improve the value of what you do. So you can share your information with internal and external stakeholders. You can target resources to ensure that you are supporting the causes or the communities or the populations that matter most. You can always shine a bright light on the organizations and programs that are just doing a phenomenal job, and use them as an opportunity to help others learn. So a number of my clients are beginning to kind of create these almost communities of practice within their grantees, identifying those that have strong measurement or really powerful impacts, and encouraging folks to learn from one another. And then also, this data quality piece is so important, because not only does it give you some comfort in what you are willing to share out publicly, but it also identifies where there are opportunities for capacity development. Where can you help? You don't need to hire PhDs, right? But where can you help your nonprofits strengthen their measurement process? And we're always excited to think about at True Impact, to think about data collection tools that folks can use on the ground that are, pretty straightforward and can get you some really great information. So measuring well, it serves your goals and it serves your partner's goals as well. So I'll turn it back to Gabe to keep the conversation going.
Great, thanks, Sara. And we've got some more questions coming in. Keep them coming. We'll get to them in just a minute. I want to circle back now to the backlash part of things, and think about the reason that this is happening and what we know about that. And we've been doing some work with the conference board and their ESG center on this, and they've been doing some great work talking with different companies and getting some data on this, and we're going to share a bit of that. But what we've come to learn through that process is that there's kind of three aspects to the backlash. The first is genuine skepticism. Is ESG really measuring companies doing the most good, if you will, to use very simple terms? The second thing is that there's philosophical opposition, and you might even say political opposition to some of the things that ESG might be trying to accomplish, or CSR programs might be trying to accomplish. And then the third, which you kind of can't ignore, is that this is an opportunity for some people to just kind of stick their head into a conversation that they might not know that much about, and make some headlines about it. So let's look at the data behind this. And the survey that was done, again, through the conference board, indicated that the most significant players in the ESG backlash are local and state policymakers and politicians. So it really can be said that this is mostly a political backlash. And the next thing is that most companies really haven't experienced a backlash. So 47% have experienced minimal backlash at this point. And the last thing is that most anti-ESG shareholder proposals at companies in the S&P 500 are involving the S issue. So it's very relevant to what we've been talking about today, that S in ESG, because you're talking about things like human rights and social issues and racial equity and civil rights, where there might be some philosophical opposition to that, like we said. I think the important takeaways for me when I look at this is that you need to be thoughtful about going back to those core things, that Venn diagram overlap of the efforts and initiatives that you're taking on, where there's a really clear connection with the work that you're doing and what your company is doing. So find that Venn diagram overlap, and that's what I take out of this. So if we were to summarize our thesis on this, right? How do you best report out on your efforts within this anti-ESG backlash? We would say to try not to get too focused on the letters. Is it ESG? Is it social impact? Is it CSR? But instead find ways, and we think this combination of data and stories is the best way to do it, to articulate how your work is helping both your company and your community at the same time. The reason that we say that, and we're going to give a little example here, a story that we came across recently to articulate this, is that it can be fleeting, and not that the ESG backlash is going to necessarily go away, but it's a very live moment that we're living in, where one week it's anti-ESG, and then there's almost this anti-ESG backlash now that's starting to happen. And to articulate that, I want to tell the story about a Fortune 100 company, and they made some news recently because they decided to strip ESG off of their website and off of their reporting based on the backlash that they got. Well, then there was backlash to the backlash, and so the next week they decided to put ESG back onto their website. So we kept up on this. We were kind of curious where this was going to go. And so the next week we went back and checked, and ESG was gone, but then there was a blog post that was articulating why ESG had been taken away in the first place and then added. And that's all within the span of 3 weeks. It was a flip, flop, flip with an asterisk basically at the end, all in the span of 3 weeks. And I feel really bad for the communications team and the crisis communications folks at that company. But there's a way where you can kind of float above that. And the tips that we've given you today and what we're going to reiterate right now are the best ways to do that. So first, right, those communications folks that I was just talking about and all of those different audiences that Sara was mentioning earlier, bring them into the CSR strategy conversation and your CSR reporting conversation from the beginning. And keep in mind that saying, no stories without numbers and no numbers without stories, right? You need to be able to tell how Sara from Madison has been able to help her life, but you want to be able to know how many Saras were there right along with her because of the efforts of your community. Next, look for opportunities for clarity, but don't make huge dramatic turns in what you're doing, right? Don't be overreactive to what's going on, but find opportunities where you can clarify those connections between what you're doing and the causes and communities you care most about. And then finally, be proactive. Think about ways, working with yourself and other teams, where you're going to be able to leverage the results that you have to get credit for your company and the great work that you and your team are doing. So this is where we want to leave you, is those takeaways from throughout the presentation today. And so we just touched on a bunch of these, and we'll use this as an opportunity to just hit a couple more highlights and then shift over to some of the questions that we're getting. So first, substantiate your work with data. Second, find that overlap in the Venn diagram. Third, stop funding your board chair's alma mater. If you can, if you've got data, don't make anyone upset with that. Then feel confident that when you're going to go to your legal team, that you've got the receipts, as I ineloquently said earlier. Determine your audiences from the start. Think about the ways that you're going to use it at the beginning and what you need to know. Don't just measure to measure, measure to improve. This is a really important one, right? It's great that you're able to put the big flashy numbers up there, but make sure that you're also thinking about how you can improve both for yourselves and your nonprofits and their beneficiaries. And lastly, make sure to download the white paper. You can get it at the link at the bottom there, and we're also going to send that out. So Jean, we'll bring you back into the conversation.
Thanks. We are at time, so I do want to take this opportunity to thank both of our panelists, Sara and Gabe, for this wonderful presentation. I know impact measurement is something that our members struggle with and are challenged by constantly. It's evolving, and I think this framework and language that you've provided is going to be really, really helpful. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We very much appreciate your time. For the questions that we did not get a chance to answer, we will follow up with you individually and answer those questions. And I would, before you sign off, like to post the session survey. Your feedback is very important to us. This is a very short 4-question survey. It'll take about a minute. Please fill it out before you sign off today. Also, the link is being dropped into the chat and the QR code is on the screen. And it helps us, continually improve and provide valuable programs in the future. So I do hope we see all of you at a future ACCP event very soon. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.